You're listening to the March 17th, 2016 edition of the Surfwatch Cyber Risk Roundup, the weekly podcast that's focused on how the world of cybercrime is impacting business. Hello, everybody. I am Jeff Peters, Surfwatch Labs editor, and I'm here once again with Matt Leifus, Surfwatch Labs writer, for our weekly podcast. On this podcast, each week we run through the top 5 trending cybercrime events, advisories, and legal actions. So we'll jump right into it with the top cybercrime event from the past week.
Coming in at number 1, we have the anti-DDoS firm Staminus. They suffered a data breach last week between March 10th and March 11th. As details continue to be released, it actually appears a lot more damage was done than previously reported in this breach. In the data breach, more than 4,000 customers of Staminus had their personal information compromised. This information included full contact information, company details, emails, and encrypted passwords. About half of these customers also had their payment card information compromised. Research also found over 140,000 entries of account billing details between Staminus and its clients. This made a lot of headlines this week. I think something with this, Jeff, probably something that really kind of pushed over. I read a lot of headlines about the Ku Klux Klan being one of Staminus's customers. I think that kind of pushed over the top. I see that you kind of went in and found some other information about what's going on here. What else did you find?
Just to recap what happened, I think it was last Thursday when Staminus's entire network went down. According to Brian Krebs, he said it was down for more than 20 hours. And I think initially the company attributed it to some other things. And then 15 gigabytes of compromised data was eventually published. The hackers who did this, the reason I think it got a lot of headlines was because they put out some information making fun of Staminus. It's a security company doing all these poor security practices and kind of poked fun at them. Hey, here's some tips for Staminus on how to protect themselves. And so that got a lot of headlines, along with the KKK, I think, using them and them being one of the customers. Yeah, so that was one of the big stories this week. Another one that I found really interesting, the number 2 cybercrime event from this week was this Bangladesh bank heist. The theft actually happened last month. I think it was February 4th and 5th that it happened. But there was some new information from Reuters this week. It said that hackers were able to steal Bangladesh Bank's credentials for the SWIFT messaging system, which is a system that banks around the world use for secure financial communication. And then they used those stolen credentials for this major bank heist. And more than $80 million was stolen in this attack back in February. But what was interesting here is the attackers actually attempted to steal close to $1 billion. So it could have been, way worse than the $80 million. And it's believed that there was a 0-day vulnerability that was used in this. So it sounds like they invested a little bit of time and effort into this attack, hoping to steal $1 billion. They got away with $80 million, so that's pretty significant.
It sounds like it was still well worth the investment. Yeah, and this Bangladesh Central Bank, they had billions in its account, which apparently is used for international settlements. Like Jeff said, the cyber criminals behind this were aiming for about $1 billion, and it's really interesting how they were. Now we say only able to get away with 80. That's still a large sum, but how they were only able to get away with 80 million as opposed to the 1 billion, and apparently that had to do with a spelling error, from what I understand, right, Jeff?
Yeah, there was some funny headlines, $1 billion bank heist foiled by a spelling error. I thought that was kind of funny, so I was tweeting it out. But yeah, there was apparently, of the money that they tried to transfer, there was a $20 million transaction that was directed to a nonprofit organization in Sri Lanka. Since that was an unusually large transaction, and there was a misspelling in the name, that typo, raised some red flags, and then they blocked that transaction, and they blocked some other transactions, so it could have been much worse, but still, 80 million's nothing to
sneeze at. Yeah. And what's really interesting about this is there's an important lesson here, in that if we apply the same logic to like your standard phishing email, that's one of the big red flags that I always look for when I get some weird looking message. How's it typed out? Are the words spelled correctly? That is a major red flag that people can honestly use. And if you see a message or something like that where there are a lot of misspellings or anything, that should raise a red flag and you should question it. Absolutely. So I'm glad that they were able to thwart the bulk of that money from going out.
Yeah, and another interesting thing here is that the bank chief, the Bangladesh bank chief, he actually resigned, I think just a few days ago. The New York Times says that he resigned on Tuesday and 3 of his subordinates were fired.
Moving on to number 3, we have Anonymous News. You guys know Anonymous. We talk about them quite a bit. They have announced over a video that they are going to launch a campaign against Donald Trump. So, and somehow that's going to actually help him. So don't worry about it. Do you see that? I mean, I just can't believe.
Yeah, it's like the whole, no press is bad press.
Oh, man. He is the king of that. Well, anyway, here's what's going on. Anonymous announced in a video they plan to dismantle, that's a quote, the controversial presidential candidate Donald Trump. The group said they plan to launch several cyber attacks against Trump's personal and business websites on April 1st, 2016. So, April Fool's Day, yay. This would not be the first time Donald Trump has been the target of hacktivism. Last year, the website for the Trump Tower suffered a DDoS attack.
Just recently, I think it was members of Anonymous, they leaked some of Trump's voicemails. I believe they were able to reset his passcode, and they leaked some of that, and that turned out to be kind of a non-story. I don't think they really found anything too damning in there. And
right.
People were kind of making fun of Anonymous because they really didn't accomplish much with that attack.
The New World Hacking Crew actually launched a DDoS attack against Trump's campaign website, and that took place at the beginning of January this year. So he has been targeted quite a bit. We'll see what comes of this campaign, which I'm sure it's going to be hashtag.
Well,
Trump.
I don't see how this would hurt him. I mean, obviously, if you take down his campaign site, if it's a site that's collecting donations, things like that, you could disrupt that a little bit. But all you're going to do is create more headlines for people to talk about him,
right?
And so it's not like I don't see how in the long run that really hurts them. I could see, obviously, if you're trying to hack his voicemail and get some dirt on him, that could potentially have political consequences. Although that didn't, but. Yeah, I don't see how a DDoS attack's going to do much, but
we'll see what comes of it. But yeah, you're right. A DDoS attack, who cares, really?
Moving on to the 4th story, we got American Express. They made an announcement regarding a data breach. They said that a third-party service provider to American Express was compromised by cyber criminals. And then American Express went on to notify its customers that their personal information may have been obtained in this attack. Some of the information at risk includes things like account numbers, names, expiration dates, and other account information. American Express, they said it's important to note that American Express owned or controlled systems were not compromised by this incident, and we are providing this notice to you as a precautionary measure. That's some of the stuff they sent their customers in a letter. But that's just another one of those third-party breaches. Yeah, it's not their fault, but when you're so interconnected, we see a lot of these every week.
And the last target of the week we're going to talk about is Ofcom, which is a UK communications regulator company. As much as 6 years of data may have been stolen by a former employee of Ofcom. The former employee then allegedly offered the information to his new employer. That doesn't sound very nice. Ofcom has informed dozens of TV companies about the breach. On the 26th of February, we became aware of an incident involving the misuse of third-party data by a former Ofcom employee. And this was a quote from a spokesman of Ofcom. He continued and said, "This was a breach of the former employee's statutory duty under the Communications Act and a breach of the contract with Ofcom," end quote.
It sounded like it was quite a bit of information that was stolen, possibly as much as 6 years of data was downloaded, and this was data that's provided by the TV broadcasters to this regulator. But yeah, apparently he's leaving the company, just decides he's going to swipe 6 years of data and then try to give it to the competitor that he ended up going to. But according to The Guardian, they said senior management at the broadcaster did not exploit the information, but instead just alerted his former employer. It seems like a bad job strategy to say, like, hey, I know I'm a new employee here. By the way, I just totally stole everything from my former employer.
Yeah, right? I mean, it's kind of like when you leave a former job for a new job, there's kind of like this practice of you should give them 2 weeks' notice. Why do you do that? Because you're showing respect for the other job, and you're showing your current job that you're willing to do that in case you leave. Well, that kind of really falls under, like, they want to be able to trust you and everything. So what's going to stop you from leaving this company and completely sabotaging what they have going on? I don't know what he was hoping for, a promotion?
Yeah, so those were the big cybercrime events from the past week that everyone was talking about. Moving on, we'll fill you in on the top 5 advisories that you might have missed. The first one was, we talk about malvertising every week on the podcast. There's always little targets here or there. This one was kind of a big story because it affected a lot of pretty popular websites. So this new malvertising campaign affected websites such as MSN.com, NewYorkTimes.com, BBC, AOL, NFL, Realtor.com, TheHill.com, Newsweek, and others. So a lot of very popular websites in there. And then users who visited a page while this malvertising campaign was going on, they were redirected to a server that delivers the Angler exploit kit, which is, again, pretty much the standard thing that happens with these malvertising campaigns lately. Yeah, and then this Angler exploit kit leads to malware. I don't think it said, I know in the past some of these have led to like Tesla Crypt ransomware and things. I don't think it said for sure what kind of malware this led to. Kind of a pretty wide-reaching malvertising campaign. It's been a while since we've seen one that's affected, like these top-tier websites like this.
Right, and with this one, when you look at the combined monthly visitors, it was well over 1 billion people monthly, probably closer to 2 billion. And it's for a lot of reports are saying that it was tens of thousands of people that could have been affected. But if you think about the reach of affecting these web types with malvertising, that could be very significant. We haven't seen one that big in a while. Like Jeff said, we report on a few minor ones. It's like, okay, just keep this in mind. This happened. This one was a pretty big deal, as I'm sure the majority of people that listen here probably go to one of these websites at some point. And there are two rogue domains that were used, and this is just something to keep in mind as well if you're looking at this. The first one was called trackmytraffic.biz, and the other one was talk915.pw. And both of the IP addresses to these domains were linked to Cloudflare. So just something to keep in mind as well when you're looking out at things like that. Moving on to the next advisory for the week, we have a ransomware threat called Cerber, and this is making news. It's a pretty standard ransomware. This one's making news, however, because of the way it informs people that they have actually been infected with this ransomware. The ransomware creates a VB script, which plays a voice message saying, quote, "Attention, your documents, photos, databases, and other files have been encrypted." The big thing with this is that it plays that message on an infinite loop. So while your computer's on, that message is going.
That's
going,
pretty funny.
I
missed that story this week.
I think it's pretty clever because I would be more inclined to do something about that. I'm just imagining something
like that happened to like my parents or someone who's not like computer savvy. They would just be, "Oh my God, a hacker's taking over the computer's talking to them."
Yeah, right.
That would just scare the crap out of them.
Yeah. Victims were given 2 options to pay for the decryption key to take care of this. The first one, if the payment was made in 7 days, the victim would only be asked to pay 1.21 Bitcoin or $521. If the payment was made after 7 days, the payment essentially doubled to 2.48 Bitcoin or $1,043.
It seems. Maybe I'm wrong here, but it seems just that, from looking at this, these prices are going up. For a while, there was a lot of really cheap ransomwares out there, but then it got a couple $100. It seems like maybe it's more expensive now. I wonder if criminals are upping their prices overall for these ransoms.
Keeping up with inflation, maybe.
That would be like interesting study to kind of like the same way you track stocks, track the ransom for different different cybercriminal groups over time? I'd be curious to know that.
Well, it's really interesting with these attacks. There honestly is a customer service aspect to it. They don't want to outprice themselves either, because if they make the ransom demand too high, no one's going to pay it, and then they'll be out of business because they're infecting all these computers, but no one's paying the ransom. So
yeah, there's probably there could potentially be a lot of business analytics behind finding that sweet price point, that perfect price point to get the maximum amount of money. Then moving on, for our third advisory, there is another piece of malware that was discovered, which researchers are calling it Ace Deceiver. And this malware is able to infect non-jailbroken iOS devices. A lot of this malware, goes after the jailbroken devices. Researchers are saying that this is the first iOS Trojan to exploit Apple DRM design flaws in order to infect devices. And we got a quote here from Palo Alto Networks. They said that what makes Ace Deceiver different from previous iOS malware is that instead of abusing enterprise certificates, such as iOS malware has done over the past 2 years, Ace Deceiver manages to install itself without any enterprise certificate at all, and it does so by exploiting design flaws in Apple's DRM mechanism. And even as Apple has removed Ace Deceiver from the App Store, it may still spread thanks to a novel attack vector. So it sounds like, at least what researchers are saying, something different that they haven't seen with these iOS malware.
So it's really interesting. When Jeff and I were going through the data today, and we were looking at the top industry discussion around advisories, Apple and Android, like for several weeks now, has topped that. And it seems like in every week we've had at least one advisory around either Apple or Android. This week's no exception. Moving on to the number 4 top trending advisory, we have a business email compromise campaign, which is being called the Olympic Vision BEC campaign, and it's targeting companies in the U.S., Middle East, and Asia. This campaign was identified by Trend Micro. In this campaign, hackers are using a keylogger called Olympic Vision, hence the name for the campaign. The keylogger is being sent as an email attachment to a member of an organization in an apparent urgent email. If you know what a business email compromise, that's pretty standard. Once the attachment is opened, that malware is downloaded and intercepts keystrokes. This specific campaign has been traced back to 2 cybercriminals, one operating out of Lagos and the other from Kuala Lumpur. What's interesting with this, Jeff, is now a lot of times when we talk about BEC scams or whaling or whatever we want to call it, we typically talk about how you have a cybercriminal through social engineering and phishing. They target like a financial representative of a company. They pose as like the CEO and they try to get him to do a wire transfer. That's not the only thing that business email compromise scams do. In this case, they were impersonating someone, and it was just for the purpose of administering malware. So I think it's important to keep in mind when we talk about business email compromise, it's not only trying to do these wire transfers. It's more the attack vector that we're talking about. The end game can be different depending on the situation.
Yeah, and who they're targeting. They're targeting
right.
The higher ups. Because obviously, if you're using a keylogger, it's much more valuable to get an executive or someone higher up in an organization
right.
to steal their credentials or something rather than some lowly, not maybe lowly's not the right word, but someone lower down like a receptionist or someone
right.
who's got to do a lot more work to then get to the big cheese. And then finally, just a quick update on all this IRS tax fraud stuff. I actually saw in the news a lot of different arrests related to a lot of minor stuff, nothing major, but a lot of different people getting arrested for tax fraud and things. And the IRS is estimating that there will be $21 billion in income tax fraud in 2016. That's a pretty good chunk.
That is a big chunk.
Yeah, so the government's estimating this $21 billion figure, and the primary factor behind these tax fraud scams is phishing. Many companies have made headlines this year due to phishing scams related to taxes. I know we were talking the last couple of podcasts about W-2 information being compromised, and I don't think we mentioned it in any of the top targets this week, but this week, once again, there was some more companies that were targeted at the same stuff, losing W-2 information. So we've pretty much seen that every week over the last month or maybe even 2 months.
Yeah, definitely. It seems it's almost on a daily basis during this tax season. We've seen some type of scam resulting W-2 information or other tax-related information being compromised. And I mean, if you just go really anywhere right now and just look this up, you'll see all kinds of information on any of our news and analysis members. You've seen the snippets, so we've been posting about this all the time lately. Moving on to trending settlements, lawsuits, and legal news. We're going to kick things off with WhatsApp. WhatsApp is facing a similar situation as Apple is over encryption, and let's get into this a little bit. The Justice Department is privately debating how to resolve a standoff with WhatsApp over an issue similar to the one playing out publicly between Apple and the FBI. This is a quote from a New York Times article. Some investigators view the WhatsApp issues as even more significant than the one over the locked phones because it goes to the heart of the future of wiretapping. And again, this is from the New York Times. And they added, in this last year, the company has been adding encryption to those conversations, making it impossible for the Justice Department to read or eavesdrop, even with the judge's wiretap order. I could see that being a pretty big deal.
Yeah, and there isn't an actual, from what I know, there's not an actual court case or anything like there is with Apple, but they're thinking that potentially there could be, just because a lot of these laws really haven't been updated around, like wiretapping, to keep up with the digital age. So some people are saying that the Justice Department is looking for kind of the perfect battle to pitch their case in court. So we'll see, what happens there. We should just note that WhatsApp, according to a report in The Guardian from a few days ago, they said that WhatsApp actually plans to expand its encryption to cover voice calls in addition to messages. And then other companies, Facebook, Google, Snapchat, others, a lot of them in Silicon Valley are they responding to what's going on with Apple, and they're trying to roll out their own increased privacy technology. So it'll just be interesting to see. I mean, all these different things, whether it's Apple or WhatsApp or different things, it'd be interesting to see how that all plays out. Moving on to the number 2 legal item, we have some news from the FTC. They put out a press release saying that the FTC is going to study the auditing of PCI compliance. And they've actually ordered 9 different companies to provide them with information on how they conduct these assessments that measure compliance with the payment card industry data security standards. These audits are basically required for organizations that process more than 1 million card transactions per year, but the audits aren't monitored by federal regulators. So it's kind of a private thing that's going on, and experts have speculated that the study that the FTC is doing is driven by all these payment card data breaches that we've seen over the past few years. I mean, we've seen less of them recently, but over the past couple of years, there's been a lot of them. And a lot of these breaches, these companies that have been breached, were previously certified PCI compliant. There was a pretty in-depth article on it on GovInfo Security. And one of the people quoted in there was the CEO of security firm SecureState. And he said, this is Ken Stasiak, he said that, I suspect that the FTC is taking a closer look into the private regulation of PCI and the validity that these assessments provide. He went on to say, if PCI compliance was working, why have there been so many breaches affecting millions of customers? So, I mean, I think it could potentially be a good thing to get a little more consistency around PCI compliance.
Just taking like an outside perspective on this, so we're bringing up PCI compliance, and we're kind of questioning it to see if it's working. So what if they find that it was ultimately a humongous waste of time? What do you think is going to come of that?
Well, I think that from what I understand about it from the FTC press release is that there's these different companies that perform assessments, and the FTC, I think right now they're just basically gathering information. They're ordering these 9 companies to provide them with information on how they're doing it and answer these different questions. And then they're going to put that information together and kind of do a study about it. So, yeah, it'll be interesting to see once that study's done if they find that it's severely lacking in certain areas or if they're doing well. But, I'm sure they're not just doing it just to waste their time.
Right. Yeah, there's probably an end goal.
At the end of it, you never know what could come of it. So it'll be interesting to follow, see what happens.
Our next bit of legal news involves St. Joseph's Health. They suffered a data breach back in 2012, and there was a settlement as a result, and that's been resolved. The 31,000 St. Joseph Health patients impacted by this 2012 data breach, which made their personal health information searchable on the internet, will be receiving checks for their share of a $7.5 million settlement. In addition, $3 million has been set aside for patients who may have suffered identity theft or out-of-pocket expenses due to the breach. Altogether, the cost of the breach totals just over $35 million. Additional costs include $4.5 million for 1 year of identity theft and credit monitoring to the class members, $7.5 million in attorney's fees and costs, and $13 million spent to institute policies to comply with state and federal authorities, as well as implement other security-related measures.
Yeah, and I should just add, I'm the one who did the math to get to $35 million, because the settlement that I read was the numbers were kind of slightly confusing the way they spread it out and totaled stuff together, but
they didn't actually say that was for $35 million.
People were reporting different numbers. I'm pretty sure that we're accurate about it, though. I think people were just doing the math wrong. So if you're going to trust someone, trust us, because I'm pretty sure, if you really care whether it was 35 or 30 or, whatever. But I thought this was interesting to include just to kind of get sort of the post-mortem of, a couple years after a breach. It's got all the costs, including identity theft protection, attorney's fees, all the money they had to invest to update their policies and update their equipment. So basically all they did is they accidentally made some personal information searchable via the internet, and 4 years later, $35 million.
Yeah, and just think about that. Not that I'm saying 31,000 people is nothing to sneeze at, but 31,000 people. How many breaches do we hear about where it's 1 million people? So just think about that when you're looking at the cost of this.
And then finally we got some updates on the arrest front. I'm sure everybody remembers whatever gate name they gave it, Celebgate, is that what they called it?
Wasn't it like something, the fappening?
The fappening, yeah.
Which I don't even understand the fappening. What does that mean? Like, why the fappening? Did you ever? What does that mean?
I don't know if our listeners out there want to educate Matt to the.
Really? That's what that means? Oops. Yeah. You don't have to include that.
Well, we'll see. Yeah. Maybe we'll include this if you guys want to know what goes on behind the scenes here. I always thought that was pretty. The way people. Well, you see, like with the Erin Andrews thing. I don't know if you follow that. Yeah, she's in court and she's crying about it, and I think it ended up being like $50 million for the
settlement.
For the settlement, and half of that was for the hotel. But yeah, I mean, you see something like that, and you see how it impacts a person's life, and here they are, everyone's trying to find nude pics of Jennifer Lawrence.
Yeah.
Anyways, back to the story though. They caught the guy, Ryan Collins, 36, of Lancaster, Pennsylvania. He pled guilty to felony hacking related to more than 100 Apple and Google accounts. And it's important to point out that these weren't all celebrity accounts. I mean, that's obviously what the media focused on, but some of them were celebrities, but some of them were not. According to the plea agreement, Collins used phishing messages to obtain victims' login credentials for these Apple and Google accounts, and then he would illegally access personal information, including nude photographs and videos. And in some cases, he used software to download the entire contents of Apple iCloud backups. From the press release, I think it said that they weren't 100% sure that he was involved in like the release of the stuff. So I don't know if he was behind it or someone else, or he shared it or what happened there. But he's
certainly the one that got the information. From what this is saying.
I mean, he said he did in this plea agreement that he signed. So
yeah, and I think according to the plea agreement, he actually faces a maximum prison sentence for this of 5 years. But according to the plea agreement, they're actually going to recommend an 18-month sentence. We'll see how that all plays out. Typically, in my experience, whatever these plea agreements usually go.
Another arrest. There's a few different arrests this week, but this one was pretty significant just in the amount of money stolen. This British man who was living in Las Vegas, he has been indicted. His name is Gareth David Long. He's 37. And he has been charged with withdrawing money from the bank accounts of hundreds of thousands of victims without authorization. So the indictment alleges that Long operated his company, V Internet Corp. LLC, and what he would do is he would deposit unsigned, remotely created checks that were drawn on accounts from all these unwitting victims. And a remotely created check is basically a check that's created not by the account holder, but by a third-party payee. And then in place of a signature, these checks contain a typed statement claiming that the check was authorized. But of course, he just lied, did it 100,000 times. So according to the press release, they said that Long's scheme ended in July 2013, and allegedly he created and deposited more than 750,000 of these remote created checks. And that wraps up this week's top trending cybercrime events, advisories, and legal actions. Now, to end the podcast, we have our funny story of the week. Did you find anything this week, Matt?
Yes, and this was a very interesting story. One of the leaders, if not the leader, of the infamous Team Ghost Shell hacking crew made a shocking decision this week. In an interview with a few publications, he actually revealed his true identity. Here's a little background on the hacker known as Ghost Shell. He's been active since early 2012. He has been part of several high-profile hacks, including several university portals, a ridiculous amount of government agencies, large corporations, and probably several other hacks that we don't know about or have even heard of. He's even participated with anonymous campaigns, and he's also never been caught. So it's very surprising to hear that he wanted to come forth with his identity. He's a 24-year-old Romanian who lives in Bucharest. What makes this story even more interesting, and in my opinion funny, is the reason he came forward. Turns out, he's having a very difficult time finding work in the real world. Ghost Shell had this to say about his situation. Also, let it be known for future generations to come that I am literally the only person in history from my country that has to prove his worth, even after everything that's happened, just so I can get a job in the industry despite every 10-year-old that defaced or DDoS random websites getting auto-hired. I am truly a legend of something.
Wow, it might be his personality.
Yeah, no kidding. Ghost Shell is actually hoping he will get arrested for the chance of getting a job in the field of cybersecurity. I think that's a pretty interesting method. So right now, he gave his address, his name, so everyone knows where he lives. It's just a matter of time to see if he's going to get arrested and what goes on with that.
I would just like to sit in on one of these future job interviews where, he says, I am legend.
Right.
Hire me.
Right. Well, hey, maybe he could have a job at Surfwatch Labs. You never know. Maybe his expertise would be welcomed here.
All right, and that'll do it for this week's podcast. As always, the Surfwatch Cyber Risk Roundup is brought to you by Surfwatch Labs. Surfwatch Labs delivers cyber risk intelligence solutions that help organizations understand the potential for cyber attacks, determine the impact of their business, and proactively address threats head-on. For weekly interviews with cyber experts, check out Surfwatch Labs' other podcast, The Cyber Chat. And for more information on cyber risk intelligence, check out surfwatchlabs.com.